MEDDPICC. It's everywhere. I mean, everywhere right now. If you're in B2B sales, you've probably heard of it. Your enablement team is pushing it on you. Your managers want you to get certified. Hell, there's entire conferences dedicated to MEDDPICC right now. But here's what's wild. It's been around since the late 90s. And if you go to trends.google.com, you type in MEDDPICC, you start to see that it's kind of been around, right? You see it ticking along until about 2021. And then the growth is really exponential. I start to ask myself why. I get it, the 90s are back. We've got, frosted tip hair, baggy jeans, but a sales qualification from 1996 is suddenly the hottest thing in B2B sales? What gives? If MEDDPICC worked back then, well, why didn't it stick? What's changed in the B2B landscape that made it not just popular now, but actually successful in ways it wasn't before? I'm Adam Boggs, managing partner at Business Artist, and I've been training and enabling sellers and sales leaders for about 15 years. I guess I've seen every bit of acronym soup and methodology that's come and gone, BANT, spiced, spinned, just to name a few. Hell, I've even built my own. They get their moment, they create some buzz, but then they fade away. But MEDDPICC, well, this one's different. I guess it's not just trendy, it's actually working. And as a consultant, I couldn't just accept that it's popular and move on. I needed to understand why. So I dug deep. And what I found is the perfect storm of changes in how B2B buyers behave, how sales cycles work, and why traditional qualification methods, well, they're failing. The result? MEDDPICC isn't just having a moment. It's become the de facto standard for B2B sales qualification. And today, I'm going to show you exactly why this 30-year-old methodology is crushing it in 2025. Let's do some history. To start at the beginning, 1996, Parametric Technology Corporation, or PTC for short. This wasn't some startup playing around with sales ideas. This was serious enterprise software company trying to figure out why some deals closed and others died. Enter Dick Dunkel, working under John Mamann's leadership with Jack Napoli helping to popularize it. They did something revolutionary for the time. They actually analyzed their wins and losses. What they found were 6 consistent factors that determine deal outcomes, not gut feelings, not relationship strength, not vibes. 6 specific measurable elements that could predict success. And if you're familiar with MEDDPICC, let me introduce you to the original MEDDPICC framework. Starting with M, or metrics, what measurable outcomes does the customer want? E, or economic buyer, who has the budget authority? Decision criteria and decision process, what standards will they use to choose? And what steps will they follow? Identify the pain. What critical problem are we actually solving? And finally, champion. Who's fighting for us internally? The result? PTC's revenue exploded from $300 million to over $1 billion in just 4 years. Not bad for a methodology that was supposedly just about qualification. But many of us know the story doesn't end there. As enterprise sales grew more complex, 2 more elements got added. P, or the paper process, and a second C for competition. MEDDPICC became MEDDPICC. Okay, I get it. So, MEDDPICC's awesome. I mean, PTC proved that. But then from the 2000s and 2010s, well, MEDDPICC existed. Some enterprise teams used it. Some even swore by it. It wasn't mainstream. It wasn't standard. So what changed? Well, here's the big unlock. Sales hasn't changed, but the way we buy has. I want to go through 3 sales game changers, starting with the explosion of the buying committee as number 1. Well, buying committees went from small groups to sprawling communities. We're talking about a fundamental shift in who makes B2B purchasing decisions. 10 years ago, you might sell to 3 to 5 people, maybe a VP, an IT director, maybe even a finance person. Today, research shows that buying committees now involve 11 to 20 stakeholders on average. Some deals have 15 plus people involved. And of course, we're not just talking about more people, we're talking about more types of people. You've got IT, security, compliance officers, you've got end users, right? You've got procurement specialists, legal teams, finance teams, operations, each with their own priorities, their own concerns, and their own success metrics. Here's some data that'll blow your mind. 79% of B2B purchases now require CFO sign-off. 52% of buying groups include VP level or higher executives. 73% of buying teams hire outside consultants to advise on major purchases. When you hire consultants to help you buy something, you know the process has gotten complicated. But here's the kicker. With all these people involved, reaching consensus is a nightmare. Gartner found that 77% of B2B buyers described their last purchase as, quote, very complex or difficult. And this is where the genius of MEDDPICC really shines through. You have the economic buyer. It forces you to really cut through the noise and identify who has the final say. Not just who influences a purchase, but actually who decides, who has budget authority. And then the champion. One of my clients actually runs an exercise called testing a champion. Are they a champion or are they a chump? Right? Are they willing to go to bat for you? Sometimes we know in B2B sales, the hardest sale isn't the one you have with a customer. It's the one that they have to have go internally when you're not part of that. So how do you empower a champion? Know that this person's got your best interest and their best interests in mind. And that's where MEDDPICC and the idea of a champion really shines. Oh, game changer number 2, the death of the linear sales cycle. B2B buyers no longer fit into our nice little neat funnel. Get this, buyers now do 69 to 95% of their research before they ever talk to a salesperson. Gartner actually reports that buyers only spend 17% of their total buying time with potential suppliers, and 75% of buyers say they prefer a sales rep-free purchase experience if possible. Gartner describes today's buyer journey as a jumble of parallel streams rather than a tidy funnel. Buyers jump back and forth between sales stages. They revisit the identifying needs stage multiple times as new stakeholders chime in. The result? Sales cycles are getting longer. The typical B2B buying cycle is now 11.5 months, nearly a year. One of my clients calls it a deal birthday, right? When the deal progresses over 12 months. And for global deals, we're talking about 16 months on average. Even mid-market SaaS deals that used to close in a few months now take 6+ months on average. Here's the scary part though. 86% of B2B purchases stall at some point during the process. Not fail, not get rejected, just, well, they stop. Buyers change their definition of the problem on average 3 times during a complex purchase. That's where MEDDPICC's decision criteria and decision process components become critical. In this sort of non-linear world, we need to understand not just what the buyer wants, but how they're going to decide and when. Traditional qualification asks, when do they want to buy? MEDDPICC maps out the entire decision process, who's involved, what steps they'll take, what approvals are needed, what could derail the timeline. And the paper process element, well, that wasn't even in the original MEDDPICC, but because enterprise buying processes weren't as bureaucratic in the 90s. Now understanding procurement, legal reviews, and security assessments can make or break a deal. With MEDDPICC, when a deal stalls, you have a roadmap. You know where the bottleneck is, you know who needs to be influenced, and what process and steps need to be completed. Without it, you're flying blind. All right, well, we move on to our last and final, our third game changer. This has to do with trust, or actually the trust deficit, you could call it. B2B buyers, just to be frank, are not trusting sellers today, while they're actually demanding more proof. There's a couple of crazy stats. Only 9% of B2B buyers find reliable information on a vendor's website. That's pretty crazy. Think if you had like 10 friends that came over and you're like, only one of you is reliable. 91% of people actually do all of their own buying research before they actually engage with a customer. 85% of B2B buyers actually define all of their requirements, do as much as they can before they ever engage. There is a paradox though, right? Where they sort of trust sellers less, they're demanding a lot more, right? Detailed business cases, proof points, ROI, case studies that we can pull together. Post-COVID, actually, after 2020, there was a lot of B2B purchases. And really now the trend is anything that's not deemed mission critical, that you can prove has value, is not going to get signed off on by the CFO, which I mentioned earlier is engaged with a lot more purchase decisions. So I guess we're beyond the days of kind of trust me, we'll just make this more efficient, this will work. They want to see the math, right? They want to see specific metrics, and they want to understand, the implications of the pain, what we're solving, and how we'll measure success. And that's where MEDDPICC, so kind of the idea of metrics and implicating the pain really comes to shine. The framework forces you to quantify everything. Instead of our software makes things faster, you need customers to reduce processing time by 70%. saving 10 hours per week and $25,000 annually. Instead of this solves an inefficiency, you need, if this problem isn't solved, you'll lose X dollars in revenue and Y% in productivity. MEDDPICC transforms sales conversations from feature discussions to business outcome discussions, and it makes the seller prove in the buyer's language with the buyer's success metrics. And competition? Well, it's fiercer than ever. B2B markets are saturated. Lead generation, we know, is harder. The competition element in MEDDPICC forces sellers to proactively differentiate, not just react when competitors come up. The result of all of these changes, organizations using MEDDPICC consistently report win rates 3x higher than those who don't. Not because, well, the methodology is magic, but because it addresses the reality of how B2B buying actually works today. All right, let's recap with some hard data to show you really how much has changed in the world of B2B buying. We're going to start off looking at some stats we've already seen on B2B buying committees. We're going to look at cycle times of sales cycles. We're going to look at the trust and the value deficits, and then obviously the impact of remote selling. Let's start off actually just with the buying committee complexity. As we mentioned, the average buying group now includes 11 to 20 people, up from 5 in the 2010s. 52% include VP level or higher executives. 73% actually hire outside consultants for major purchases. And internal misalignment causes 60% of deal delays. With the sales cycle changes, the average B2B cycle is now 11.5 months or 16 months for global deals. 86% of purchases stall during the process. Buyers change problem definition 3 times during purchases, and only 43% of sales forecasts are accurate. Trust and value demands. 91% of research vendors before sales contact. Only 9% trust vendor websites fully. 87% restrict purchases to mission-critical needs post-2020, and 79% require CFO approval. And bringing it all home, the remote selling impact. 80% of B2B interactions now happen digitally. The number of touches required increased 65% from 17 to 26 touches. The demo length decreased from 36 to 20 minutes, and 75% prefer a rep-free experience for basic info. And here's a stat that should terrify every sales leader. Did you know that fewer than 20% of sales organizations achieve a forecast accuracy of 75% or higher? That means that 80% of companies are missing their revenue projections by more than 25%. But here's what's interesting. Companies that implement structured qualification frameworks like MEDDPICC do see dramatic improvements. On average, 25% increase in win rates for forecasted deals, 50% reduction in deal slippage, and 40% improvement in forecast accuracy. This data doesn't lie. The B2B landscape fundamentally changed in the last 15 years, and MEDDPICC addresses those changes in ways that traditional qualification methods simply can't. So that's it. You know, MEDDPICC's, well, it's awesome. But here's the thing. Despite all the evidence, despite the popularity, despite the proven results, MEDDPICC implementations, they still fail a lot. I see the same patterns over and over again. Companies treat MEDDPICC like a compliance exercise. You fill out the fields in Salesforce, you check the boxes, you move on. But they're not using it to actually qualify deals, or most importantly, to coach reps at the manager level. A client we actually just worked with said, managers pull up dashboards, they see empty fields, and they scold reps. The reps type in the fastest answer possible just to complete the MEDDPICC records. The CRM looks full, but the data, to be honest, is quite hollow, right? Companies pile MEDDPICC on top of everything else they're already doing, Band, Sandler, custom scorecards, old CRM stages. It becomes complexity instead of clarity. To do it well, if you're implementing MEDDPICC, you actually have to be pulling something else out. In order to learn, we also have to sort of unlearn some old behaviors in order to do it right. One expert that we talked to said it's like renovating a house without removing walls you no longer need. Organizations certify reps in MEDDPICC, but they don't train managers on how to coach with it. The methodology becomes something reps learn about, but not something they live by. Leadership says they want MEDDPICC, but still makes decisions based on gut feel, relationship strength, or pipeline coverage. If the methodology doesn't drive real decision making, reps will see through it. What separates successful MEDDPICC implementations? Start with the managers, not the reps. Fully start with the managers, not the reps. Train the leaders to coach with MEDDPICC before teaching it to the sellers. Really, start with the managers, not the reps. You have to retire the old methods. You have to make room for MEDDPICC by removing conflicting approaches. You have to make it impossible to skip. You have to build it into deal reviews, forecasting, and coaching around the MEDDPICC elements. And then lastly, you have to measure behavior change, right? How do we track whether deals are actually being qualified, not just whether fields are filled? The methodology, MEDDPICC, it works. The question is whether organizations are willing to actually implement it as a management system, not just as a rep checklist. All right, let's bring it home by circling back where we started. MEDDPICC is everywhere. It's because it's evolved from a 1990s qualification tool into a modern framework that addresses today's B2B reality. We had talked about 3 game changers: the buying committee explosion, the death of the linear sales cycle, and of course the trust deficit. These created the perfect storm where traditional qualification methods, they couldn't handle it. MEDDPICC doesn't just handle these changes, it was built for them. And organizations that are getting it right are seeing a 3x higher win rate, 50% less deal slippage, and dramatically improved forecast accuracy. In a world where 80% of companies miss their revenue targets by 25% or more, MEDDPICC is not just about competitive advantage, it's actually about survival. But success requires treating MEDDPICC as what it actually is, a management system for complex B2B deals, not a compliance exercise for reps. Here's my prediction. MEDDPICC, it isn't going away. If anything, as B2B buying gets even more complex, as committees get even larger, as sales cycles get even longer, the need for structured qualification will only grow. The question isn't whether you should adopt MEDDPICC. The question is whether you'll implement it right. If you found this deep dive valuable, please hit the like button. Yeah, I guess I'm the person now telling you hit the like button. I'm planning a whole series breaking down each element of MEDDPICC with real examples on implementation stages. And if you're dealing with MEDDPICC implementation challenges at your organization, drop me a comment. I'd love to hear, what's working, what's not, and what questions you're wrestling with. The 90s are back. The methodology is here to stay. I'm Adam Boggs from Business Artists. Be well, everyone.